I opened the door and saw the last person I expected, Marissa, the wife of my closest client. What she told me next shattered my entire world. My wife was having an affair with her husband. The knock at the door had a steady, deliberate rhythm that pulled me from my work. I looked up from the spreadsheet glowing on my laptop screen, my concentration breaking. This wasn't the casual knock of a neighbor asking to borrow sugar, nor was it the hurried tap of a delivery driver dropping off a package. It had weight to it, calculated, purposeful. When I opened the door, I was taken aback to see Marissa Dickinson standing there. Marissa, wife of Thomas Dickinson, one of my longest-standing clients. Normally, she was the embodiment of composure, always immaculately dressed and perfectly put together. Today, though, something was different. Subtle cracks had appeared in her polished exterior. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, despite her efforts to hide it. She wore a chic, high-end outfit, like she'd just stepped out of an upscale boutique, but her face betrayed her. She looked exhausted, as if sleep had been a distant memory. "Marissa?" I said, my concern evident. My brow furrowed. "Is everything all right?" "Ronald, can I come in?" she asked softly. Her voice lacked its usual strength, barely above a whisper. Caught off guard, I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Yeah. Of course. Please, come in." She entered slowly, and I closed the door behind her. Despite knowing each other for years, we'd always interacted at formal events, client dinners, business galas. Marissa had always been Thomas's graceful, charming partner, the kind of woman who could navigate any social gathering with ease. But now, standing hesitantly in my hallway, she looked like she was on the verge of falling apart. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" I offered, motioning towards the kitchen. "No, thank you," she said curtly, shaking her head. "This isn't a social visit." The tension in her voice made me pause. I turned fully to face her. "All right. Should we sit down? Sounds like this might take a while." She gave a small nod, and I led her to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her gaze was distant, her body taut as if bracing for something difficult to say. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," she finally murmured, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know who else to turn to. She hesitated, her words catching in her throat. A shaky breath escaped her as if she were fighting to hold back tears. "It's okay," I said gently, trying to project calm even as I felt the tension thickening in the air. "What's going on?" Marissa drew in another breath, this one ragged and unsteady. Then she dropped the bombshell. "Ronald. Thomas is cheating on me." The words hung there, heavy and raw, echoing in the room. I blinked, stunned. My first reaction wasn't anger, nor was it disbelief, it was confusion. Why would Marissa come to me with something like this? Sure, Thomas and I had developed a friendly rapport over the years, but this wasn't just a casual conversation between acquaintances. This was something raw, intimate, a wound she had chosen to lay bare in front of me. What made her think I was the person to tell? Before I could voice that question, her next words answered it for me. "It's Beatrix," she said, her voice cracking. "Your wife." The words hit me like a gut punch. Beatrix? My wife? It sounded absurd, impossible even, but the anguish etched into Marissa's face told me this was no cruel joke. The certainty in her eyes silenced any attempt at denial. Are you sure?" I managed to ask. My voice felt hollow, as if it didn't belong to me. "Yes," she replied without hesitation, her tone cutting in absolute. "I wouldn't have come here otherwise. I've seen it with my own eyes." Her movements were sharp and deliberate as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small stack of photographs. My stomach clenched the moment I saw them, and my hands shook as I took them from her. I wasn't ready, but I forced myself to look. The first image was blurry, obviously taken from a distance, but the context was unmistakable. Beatrix and Thomas sat at a small, dimly lit table in what looked like a restaurant. His hand rested gently on hers, and the way she leaned toward him, her eyes soft and intimate, it made my chest constrict with fury. I flipped to the next photo and then the next. Each was more damning than the last. Beatrix's car parked in front of a hotel. Thomas brushing her hair back as they stood close together on a crowded sidewalk. The timestamps on the photos hit me like another blow. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It had been going on for weeks. Maybe even months. "I thought you should know," Marissa said softly, breaking the silence. Her gaze didn't waver, steady and filled with pain. "This isn't the first time Thomas has done something like this. But I know how much you and Beatrix mean to each other." I couldn't stay silent. I swallowed hard, my mind reeling as I scrambled to connect the dots. The late-night work meetings Beatrix mentioned, the endless business trips, the times her phone was always out of reach or flipped face down on the table. How had I been so blind? Marissa seemed to read my thoughts. She nodded grimly and added, "I know. I know this isn't the first time Thomas has had an affair. But this time, I'm not letting it destroy me." I nodded faintly, still trying to steady myself. Why come here? What do you want from me?" I asked, though the answer hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Because maybe we can help each other," she said firmly, her tone growing sharper. "Help each other?" I repeated, uncertain. The words felt foreign, like I didn't fully grasp what she was getting at. "We can't just let them walk away from this," she continued, her voice hardening, trembling with barely restrained fury. "They've betrayed us, humiliated us. They've made fools of us. We deserve better than that. We need to make them pay for what they've done." I stared at her, caught between the whirlwind of my own shock and the fire in her eyes. Part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. But another part, buried deep beneath the heartbreak, felt a spark of anger ignite. An anger that was starting to grow. I frowned, uncertain where Marissa's anger was taking us. I treaded carefully, sensing the weight behind her words. "Okay," I said slowly. "But, what exactly are you suggesting we do?" Marissa took a deep breath, visibly steadying herself. Her eyes locked onto mine, intense and unwavering. "I don't want to confront Thomas yet," she said firmly. "Not without a plan. If I go at him unprepared, he'll twist everything around, just like he always does. But if we work together, if we gather enough evidence, we can expose them both." "Expose them?" I echoed, still processing her words. "To who? And for what?" "To everyone," she declared without hesitation. "Their friends, their families, anyone they care about. I want them to feel the same humiliation they've put us through. And if it ruins Thomas's reputation, his career? Even better." Her tone sent a chill through me. Beneath the anger was something more, a desire not just for justice, but for revenge. It was darker, more consuming than I had expected. I hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "I don't know, Marissa," I admitted. This isn't really my kind of thing." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You think it's mine? I didn't plan for any of this, Ronald. But here we are. I never thought I'd be the kind of person plotting how to get back at my husband and his mistress. But they left us no choice." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "Look, I know this is a lot to take in, but think about what they've done to us. They lied to us, disrespected us, and never gave a second thought to how their actions would destroy our lives. Do you really think we should just let them walk away from this like nothing happened?" Her words stirred something deep inside me. The images of Beatrix and Thomas, so blatant, so intimate, flashed again in my mind, searing my thoughts with anger and pain. But acting on that fury? That was a line I wasn't sure I could cross. Even if I wanted to go along with this, I said slowly, I wouldn't even know where to start. What exactly do you think we should do? Marissa's lips curled into a faint smile, almost triumphant, as if she'd been waiting for that question. Hire a private investigator, she said confidently. Don't worry. I've already taken care of that. What? I blinked, startled. Without a word, she reached into her designer bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. She slid it across the coffee table toward me. I've been tracking Thomas for weeks now, she explained. Phone logs, credit card statements, location history, I've got it all. And there's more. Photos. Videos. Enough to confront them both. I stared at the folder as though it might burst into flames. This was real, far more real than I was prepared for. I swallowed hard, knowing that with the evidence laid out before me, there was no going back. I opened the folder with trembling hands, my heart pounding as I scanned its contents. Inside was a meticulously detailed record of Thomas's movements, hotel receipts, restaurant reservations, and screenshots of texts exchanged with Beatrix. Each piece of evidence was laid out with painstaking precision. There was no room for denial. Marissa had left nothing to chance. I shook my head bitterly, closing the folder for a moment. Justice, what does that even mean in a situation like this? It means whatever we decide it does, she replied, her voice unwavering. That's the point, Ronald. We're not powerless anymore. We can take control. I exhaled slowly, the weight of her words settling heavily on my chest. Take control. That was something I hadn't even considered. I had been drowning in shock and anger, but now, maybe there was a way to take back some sense of power. What do you want from me, Marissa? I finally asked. Her expression softened, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of vulnerability beneath her resolute mask. I need your help. Thomas trusts you, doesn't he? You can get close to him, ask the kinds of questions I can't without raising suspicion. I hesitated, my mind racing. Could I really do that, pretend everything was normal while secretly gathering more evidence? It felt wrong, deceptive. But then again, hadn't they already deceived us? The thought lingered in my mind over the next few days. Beatrix had been acting as if nothing was amiss. One evening, as I was putting away dishes in the kitchen, she leaned casually against the counter, watching me with a smile that once would have filled me with warmth. You've been quiet lately, she said, her tone light. Everything okay? Yeah, I replied without meeting her eyes. Work's just been a lot. She gave me a soft, sympathetic smile. Well, if you need to talk, I'm here. The irony of her words made my jaw clench. How could she stand there, offering support like nothing was wrong, when all the while she was lying to my face? I forced a nod, hating how easily she could maintain the illusion. The plan became clearer in my mind. I had to get closer to Thomas, play my part, and wait for the right moment to push for answers. The opportunity came when Thomas and I met for drinks at our usual club. We hadn't seen each other in a few weeks, and I watched him carefully, noting every gesture, every word. You've been busy lately, I said casually as I leaned back in my chair. Thomas hesitated for a brief moment. It was subtle, barely noticeable, a flicker of something that crossed his face before he regained composure. Yeah, he finally said, forcing a laugh. You know how it is, busy season. Beatrix has been working late a lot too, I added, watching his reaction closely. Seems like both our spouses are busier than usual these days. For a split second, he froze. It was almost imperceptible, the way he shifted his grip on his glass, but I caught it. Then he laughed, louder than necessary, the sound strained and unnatural. Yeah, well, that's life, right? Always something going on. He redirected the conversation quickly, but I knew I had struck a nerve. The facade was beginning to crack. Marissa was right. We had the upper hand now. The thought of finally confronting them both, of exposing the lies and betrayal, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. What's the plan? I whispered to myself later that night, the images of those damning photos still burned into my mind. It was time to see this through. We follow them, Marissa said, her voice steady but cold. I'll keep an eye on Thomas. You take care of Beatrix. If we catch them together, there's no way they can deny it. The plan sounded simple, almost too simple. But the weight of what we were about to do felt anything but. Thursday came quicker than I expected. Too quick. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. But here I was, standing with Marissa in the dim lighting of a downtown hotel parking garage, the tension between us thick and suffocating. They're here, Marissa whispered, her eyes narrowed as she pointed toward the building. I swallowed hard, feeling my stomach twist. I didn't want to believe it. Some part of me still hoped this was all a mistake. But I nodded anyway, forcing my feet to move. We entered the hotel in silence, each step heavy with dread. I held the key card tightly in my hand, as though the plastic held all the answers I didn't want. My hand shook slightly as I slid the card into the lock. It clicked, and I pushed the door open. What I saw inside burned itself into my memory, searing like a brand. Beatrix and Thomas were tangled together on the bed, their faces lit by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. They were laughing, until they saw us. The moment the door swung open, their laughter died in an instant. Their eyes widened in shock, horror overtaking their features as they froze like deer caught in headlights. Under any other circumstances, their panic might have seemed almost ridiculous. But here and now, it was infuriating. You've officially destroyed everything, Marissa said coldly, her voice cutting through the thick silence like a knife. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Beatrix broke the silence, her voice cracking as she tried to reach me with those pleading eyes. Ronald. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound raw and empty. Not what it looks like. Beatrix, you're in a hotel room with Thomas. How exactly am I supposed to interpret this? Let's all just calm down, Thomas interjected, his voice unnervingly calm as he tried to steady himself. There's no need for this to get out of hand. How long? I cut him off, my voice low but unrelenting. Beatrix's eyes darted toward Thomas instinctively, as though searching for his direction. That tiny, automatic gesture sent another surge of fury surging through me. Even now, after being caught red-handed, she looked to him instead of me. I clenched my fists, taking a step forward. I said how long? I repeated, louder this time. Beatrix finally met my gaze. Her lower lip trembled, and her voice was barely a whisper when she answered. A few months. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my voice echoing in the small room like a gunshot. A few months. It didn't just happen, Beatrix. You don't accidentally find yourself in hotel rooms with another man. This wasn't some mistake. Thomas had the audacity to scoff. Come on, Ronald. You really want to act like this is all on us? It takes two to tango. Maybe if you'd been paying more attention at home. Before he could finish, my fist collided with his jaw. The impact sent him sprawling onto the bed. Beatrix screamed, but I barely heard her. The months of rage, betrayal, and humiliation boiled over in that single punch. Thomas groaned, clutching his face as he tried to regain his footing. Ronald, stop! Beatrix cried, grabbing my arm in a desperate attempt to hold me back. I turned on her, my voice a low, furious growl. You don't get to tell me what to do. Not after this. Not after everything. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. Beatrix flinched, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thomas lay on the bed, glaring at me but saying nothing. The room buzzed with tension so thick it was suffocating. None of their excuses or denials could erase what had already been done. Marissa, who had been silent through most of the confrontation, finally spoke. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, her gaze softening as she looked at me. I didn't answer right away. My knuckles ached, my head throbbed, and my chest was tight with emotion I couldn't begin to untangle. Was I okay? No. I wasn't sure I ever would be again. I shook my head slowly. Not even close. Marissa gave a knowing nod, like she had expected that answer. She stood there in silence for a moment before speaking again. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice raw and strained. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. "Now. Now we figure out how to make them pay." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The idea of revenge had seemed satisfying in the heat of discovery, but now that I had seen Beatrix and Thomas together, I wasn't sure if I had the stomach for it. I didn't know how far I was willing, or able, to go. "What does that even mean?" I asked quietly, unsure if I really wanted to know the answer. Marissa's expression softened slightly. "Take the time you need, Ronald. But don't wait too long. They won't." With that, she climbed into her car and drove off, leaving me alone in the dimly lit parking lot. I stood there for a moment, letting the cold air bite at my skin as I tried to clear my thoughts. The drive home passed in a blur, my mind swirling with everything I had seen and heard. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark and silent. It felt empty, like a place I no longer belonged. Once inside, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the photographs Marissa had given me. My hands trembled as I spread them across the kitchen counter. Each picture stared back at me like a cruel reminder of the betrayal I could no longer ignore. Beatrix's face was in nearly every shot, smiling in that warm, familiar way I once loved. But now, those smiles felt hollow, taunting me with the lies they hid. I didn't hear her footsteps until she was standing in the doorway. "Ronald," Beatrix said cautiously, her eyes flicking toward the photos scattered on the counter. "I think we need to talk." "Yeah," I replied, my tone clipped and cold. "We do." She hesitated, wringing her hands nervously. "I know how this looks," she started, "but I swear, it's not what you think." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could hold it back. "Not what I think." "Beatrix, what I think is that my wife has been sneaking around with one of my closest clients for months. Am I wrong?" Her face crumpled, guilt and shame flooding her features. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean. If you cared about this marriage, if you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I cut in, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Beatrix broke down, sobs racking her body as she sank to the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered between gasps of breath. "I'm so sorry." I stared at her, this woman I thought I knew, and felt nothing. Just emptiness. Whatever love or connection we'd shared had withered the moment she chose to betray me. "You've already lost me," I said with an eerie calmness. "The moment you decided to betray me, you ended this." She tried to speak again, but I couldn't bear to hear more excuses. "Stay with your sister tonight," I said firmly, turning away. "I don't want you here." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her behind in her tears. I half expected Marissa to reach out and push me toward the next step in her plan for revenge. But when the doorbell rang later that night, it wasn't Marissa standing on my porch. It was Thomas. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice sharp as a blade. Thomas raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his face swollen and bruised from where I had punched him the night before. "Look, Ronald, I just want to talk," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Talk?" I repeated, scoffing. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here after everything." "I know," he said quickly, stepping back slightly. "But please, just give me a few minutes. I need to explain. Explain. Another word I was quickly coming to despise. I crossed my arms, glaring at him with all the rage and disgust I could muster. You've got 1 minute, I said through gritted teeth. And it better be good. I just want to talk, Thomas said cautiously, his voice quieter than usual. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here, I shot back, crossing my arms over my chest. Say what you need to say and then get off my property. He flinched at my words but didn't back down. Ronald, I'm not here to make excuses, he said after a moment, his voice steady but subdued. Good, I said sharply, narrowing my eyes. You think you can just walk in here like that makes a difference? I trusted you. I defended you. And this is how you repay me. Thomas's shoulders sagged, and he gave a slow shake of his head. I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I wanted to say I'm sorry. You've said enough. My tone was ice cold, cutting through the frigid air. Now get off my property. Thomas hesitated, then nodded in defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his silhouette disappearing into the night. I shut the door and exhaled, feeling drained but no less furious. Later that day, my phone buzzed, and I wasn't surprised to see Marissa's name on the screen. She had made it clear she wasn't done. How are you holding up? She asked as soon as I answered, her voice sharp and focused. How do you think? I replied bitterly. Thomas showed up here earlier. Tried to apologize like that would fix anything. She gave a humorless laugh. Of course he did. They'll act like nothing happened, and we'll be left picking up the pieces. Unless what? I asked, already weary from the direction I knew this conversation was heading. I've been working on something, Marissa said, her tone cool but resolute. If we time this right, we can destroy them both in one fell swoop. But I'll need your help. A shiver ran down my spine. Whatever she had in mind, I knew it wouldn't be subtle or merciful. I stepped outside, pressing my fingers to the bridge of my nose. What kind of effort are we talking about here? Marissa's voice sharpened as she explained. Documents, bank statements, wire transfers. Thomas isn't as clean as he wants people to think. I've got a detailed portfolio linking him to embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraud. It's all airtight, enough to ruin him for good. My stomach churned as I absorbed her words. And Beatrix? I asked hesitantly, bracing myself for the answer. Marissa chuckled softly, but there was no warmth in the sound. That's the best part. If we time it right, we can implicate her too. I've been digging into her finances. Let's just say she hasn't been entirely transparent. With the right framing, we can make it look like she was complicit. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, the weight of it all pressing down on me. This was no ordinary act of revenge, this was a meticulously designed blueprint for utter destruction. I closed the folder she had given me earlier and shook my head. This feels extreme, Marissa. Extreme, she echoed. They tore apart our lives, Ronald. We're just leveling the playing field. Over the next several days, she sent me updates. Each file, every detail, was carefully laid out. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. Marissa had uncovered Thomas's darkest secrets, embezzlement schemes, fraudulent transfers, and tax evasion. His professional life was about to implode, and she wanted my help to ensure the fallout was unavoidable. You've got connections at his office, don't you? Marissa asked one night during a late call. Yeah, I admitted reluctantly. Good. Use them. We'll make sure the right people see this at the right time, she said with chilling confidence. While Marissa dismantled Thomas's career piece by piece, phase 2 of her plan came into focus, Beatrix. Marissa had built a strategy to destroy her credibility, both personally and financially. Each new revelation tightened the noose around their necks. There was no going back now. I immersed myself in Beatrix's personal finances, searching for anything Marissa and I could use against her. It felt dirty, invasive even, to sift through her bank statements and scroll through her social media posts, but the betrayal had left me hardened. The man who might have once hesitated was gone. Within days, I found exactly what Marissa had been hoping for. Beatrix had exploited her position at a non-profit to siphon funds for personal indulgences, lavish dinners, spa retreats, and luxury vacations. At first glance, they were cleverly disguised, but the patterns became obvious the deeper I dug. The day of reckoning arrived faster than I anticipated. Marissa and I met at her lawyer's office, where she finalized the last pieces of our plan. "Once this is out there, there's no undoing it," she said with quiet intensity. "Are you ready for that?" I hesitated for a moment, the gravity of our actions pressing heavily on my mind. Could I live with what we were about to do? Then I nodded. "Yeah. I'm ready." That evening, I delivered the incriminating portfolio to Thomas's company's board of directors. At the same time, Marissa's contact leaked the information to the media. The avalanche of scandal was in motion, unstoppable now. Headlines hit fast, exposing Thomas's financial crimes and Beatrix's misconduct. Within hours, the narrative had shifted from whispered suspicions to a full-blown public spectacle. But I didn't feel victorious. If anything, I felt hollow, as if all the rage and purpose that had driven me had vanished, leaving only a bitter void behind. The next morning, Beatrix showed up at the house. She looked broken, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She clutched her coat like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Ronald," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Please, let me in." I didn't move. I stood there, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe. "What do you want, Beatrix?" "I know it was you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You and Marissa. You did this." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "You don't get to play the victim here. You brought this on yourself." Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head, but I didn't care. I couldn't. I shut the door and left her standing on the porch, clutching her misery like a lifeline. Later that day, Marissa called, her voice brimming with triumph. "The fallout is worse than I expected. Thomas's company has called an emergency board meeting, and Beatrix's nonprofit is already distancing themselves from her. We did it, Ronald. We won." "Yeah, we won," I replied, the words feeling foreign and lifeless in my mouth. I hung up and stared out the window, unable to shake the ache in my chest. Victory didn't feel like victory. It felt like nothing. The world around us took notice. The story spread like wildfire, fueling gossip and headlines. Thomas became a cautionary tale, an example of hubris and deceit. His career was shattered. Meanwhile, Beatrix faced her own reckoning. Her nonprofit issued a statement announcing a full audit of its finances, making it clear they were severing ties with her. The board expressed their shock and disappointment, and soon, Beatrix was professionally ruined, a pariah in the very circles she had once dominated with ease. A week after the story broke, the silence in my house became suffocating. The anger that had once consumed me was gone, leaving me with only the quiet, echoing consequences of our actions. I sat alone in the dimly lit house, nursing a glass of whiskey as the silence pressed in on me. The only sound was the occasional crackle of ice in my glass. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen, Beatrix's name lit up in stark contrast against the darkness. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice void of warmth. There was a pause on the other end before she finally spoke. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," she said quietly, her voice brittle, "but you deserve to hear it, an apology." Her words caught me off guard. They weren't what I'd expected, but they weren't enough, not after everything she'd done. "Why, Beatrix? I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Why did you do it? She took a deep, shuddering breath. I don't know, she admitted. At first, it was just exciting. It felt different. But then it spiraled so quickly, and before I knew it, I couldn't stop. I hate myself for it, Ronald. I really do. I don't know what I was thinking. I've lost everything, my career, my reputation, you. Her words hit harder than I expected. I stayed silent, gripping the glass tighter as she continued. I guess. I felt invisible, she whispered. I wasn't enough, and Thomas, he made me feel seen. I'm not excusing what I did. It was wrong, and I know that. But I need you to understand, it wasn't because I didn't love you. I couldn't respond. The words were stuck in my throat, weighed down by anger, pain, and a deep, hollow ache I couldn't shake. Eventually, I ended the call without saying anything else. What was there left to say? That night, Marissa called. Her voice was sharp and direct. How are you holding up? I don't know, I admitted honestly. Beatrix came by earlier. What did she want? Marissa asked, suspicion lacing her words. To apologize, I said softly. She wanted to say she's sorry. Marissa scoffed. Of course she's sorry. She's sorry she got caught. Maybe, I murmured. But I think she's also sorry for what she lost. There was a pause on Marissa's end before she changed the subject. Over the next few days, she texted and called frequently, eager to share updates on Thomas's downfall. He's selling the house, she said one evening, her voice gleeful. His company froze his accounts. He's scrambling to liquidate everything. It's pathetic. Good for him, I muttered bitterly, my tone sharper than I intended. What's wrong? Marissa asked, picking up on the edge in my voice. This is what we wanted, isn't it? Yeah, I guess, I trailed off, sighing. But it doesn't feel like a win. Her voice hardened. Ronald, stop second-guessing this. They betrayed us. They tore our lives apart. They desecrated everything we built. She wasn't wrong, but that didn't change the emptiness inside me. I wanted revenge to give me closure, to somehow fill the void left by their betrayal. But all it had done was leave me with more questions and more pain. Later that night, Marissa invited me over to talk. We stood in her kitchen, and she poured 2 glasses of bourbon. You look like you need this, she said, sliding a glass toward me. Thanks, I muttered, taking a sip. The alcohol burned going down, but the distraction was welcome. Marissa leaned against the counter, watching me closely. What's going on, Ronald? You've been distant lately. I sighed, setting the glass down. I don't know. I guess I thought this would feel different. I thought I'd feel better. Her gaze softened for a moment, but then she straightened, her expression guarded once again. You're grieving, she said quietly. We both are. But trust me, we'll come out of this stronger. I wasn't sure if I believed her. I don't know, Marissa, I said, shaking my head. I thought revenge would make me feel better, but it hasn't. It's just left me feeling empty. Her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing slightly. They deserved it, she said firmly. Don't let yourself forget that. I didn't respond right away. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. The weight of everything we had done pressed down on me, and I could see that Marissa wasn't interested in hearing doubts. She took a step back, her eyes searching mine for a moment before she grabbed her purse. Forget it, she said abruptly, her tone sharp and dismissive. I'll see myself out. And just like that, she left. A week later, I stood in the doorway of what had once been my home. Cardboard boxes stacked in the moving truck behind me held all that was left of a life I no longer recognized. The house was hollow now, stripped of warmth, a ghost of the place where I once imagined I'd grow old. It was a graveyard of memories I couldn't carry anymore. I lingered for a few moments, taking one last look at the empty rooms and walls that had witnessed both love and betrayal. Then I turned, walked down the driveway, and climbed into my car. The engine roared to life, and I took a deep breath before shifting into gear. As I drove away, I felt the strangest sensation, like a weight lifting from my chest. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, and for once, that didn't scare me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was finally moving forward, towards something new.